Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis Podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, CapM shares his path from a top target in the UK to working in debt capital markets for an investment bank in Singapore. We learn why he moved to the UK for school, why he ended up back in Singapore, and why he made the jump to Treasury for a large corporation in Hong Kong. Enjoy. All right, CapM, welcome to the Wall Street Oasis Podcast.
Hey, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, nice to be here, and thanks for having me.
It'd be great if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Sure. Yeah. So I studied in one of the target UK universities in London, and I after graduation I went back to Asia to start in my first job in investment banking, so specifically in the debt capital markets industry. I was in DCM, debt capital markets, for about 4 years. Then I joined one of my clients actually in their Treasury department. So I would say that you could consider that as the exit opportunities. And then since then, I've always been in Treasury and you sort of leveraging the knowledge and experience from my DCM days in corporate Treasury.
And that's where we are now. So let's go all the way back, though, to undergrad at this target university in the UK. Why go to the UK? What was the thought process? Were you thinking, I'm going to stay there? Did you always know you wanted to do debt capital markets or DCM?
Yeah. So going back to the decision of studying the UK, I've always wanted to study overseas and gain sort of a different sort of exposure.
And where were you from originally, if you don't mind?
I grew up in Asia, specifically in Singapore.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you kind of knew early on. How did you know that you wanted to be in the UK? Was it or get that exposure? Was it parents saying you should go? Was it just you thinking it yourself, or what kind of encouraged you?
Well, yeah, it was basically all me, just wanting to live and experience a different, the other side of the world.
Yeah,
it was definitely the best, the best decision ever. I would always tell my parents, the person who left is different from the person who came back.
For sure. And so you don't regret at all going to the UK for your study. What do you think it helped you in the most for other listeners that are maybe thinking of making a similar move? What were the biggest pros of studying somewhere outside your home country or outside of Singapore?
It appeals to people who are always in search of going out of their comfort zone. Just I didn't expect anything. I just went and I loved it. I like being independent. I like the sort of the independent life. The thing that really...
So were you just doing this as like an adventure, or did you think, hey, it's going to be good for my career?
Both. Yeah, I think definitely the school I went to was pretty good.
Yeah,
and in the sort of the target zone for finance. But I also think that on top of getting an education, it was good to see what it was like outside of Asia. I didn't really have a lot of that growing up. So that was just my chance to figure out how it is. I think it's similar to how maybe Westerners or anybody else who wants to understand Asia. I think it's similar.
Yeah, studying abroad programs and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
So okay, so you're there. You're kind of tell me a little bit about like the recruiting for investment banking, kind of going through that program. Was it something where like by sophomore year you had to figure it out, or back then when you were recruiting was it a little bit more relaxed? Because I know it's competitive coming out of the school you were at. So how did you kind of treat it, and how did you end up back, back in your home country?
Sure. I didn't really take it as seriously as I expected to be. I came into the school. Back then, I was just so grateful and happy to be able to land in the school that I was in. Then it was only after arriving in the UK, and then I got bombarded with all the internship cycles and the job applications, and they all start way before the actual
job. Wait for the actual job.
Yeah. So but that was just like the culture of the university or the undergraduate.
Were you applying mostly to like UK based banks then, or like were you ready for the interviews, or did you like you knew what was coming, or was it a surprise to you?
It was a surprise at the start, but I just kept applying. I applied to all banks, then in London, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, actually basically anywhere. The thing that I kept quite fixed was that I wanted to do finance, specifically front office, sell side finance. The thing that I wanted to say was I graduated in the year or the year after the Eurozone crisis. So in Europe or in London, it was definitely a lot harder. So my feeling back then was that the hiring was they would look at the situation back then and they would decide the hiring plans for the next year. So if they were in a crisis this year, they would that would affect the hiring in that year or the year after. So I was in that zone.
Yeah.
And I found it really difficult then to find something in London. I would have stayed in London if I had a job, but unfortunately I didn't. And I managed to score an offer back home.
And the offer back home was in a debt capital markets group.
Yes.
Specifically, was it something where like you were interviewed for that and you had to know specifically about capital markets before the interview, or did you, get a job with the bank and then they placed you in that group later on?
It was a mixture of both. To be specific, it was a management associate program where they allowed you to rotate.
Oh, cool.
I think it's common in some of the banks.
Yeah.
But the main difference in between some of these programs is that they allowed you to some of the banks allow you to choose your eventual department, and some didn't. So I actually had two offers from banks back in Singapore. One didn't allow you to choose, so you would rotate. You would do rotations for 1 to 2 years.
And you're rotating through like corporate banking, credit risk. What else? Like what types of departments are you rotating through?
Yeah, I'll comment on that.
Okay.
So the structure of those rotations were that you would rotate. Sometimes you have a choice, sometimes you don't. And for the program that didn't allow you to choose your eventual department, they would not. Your rotations are basically also not fixed. I didn't go for that. I went for another one where I was allowed to choose my eventual department. Well, obviously they had to pick me for that eventual department. But so anyway, I chose the debt capital markets front office department as my eventual home department, and because of that, they were able to structure my rotations around what I needed to know for my eventual job. So for front office debt capital markets, I was rotated to credit risk, syndicate desk, even like corporate banking, where I got to know the RMs that I would work with closely. A short stint in the ops department, in the trading department. Yeah.
Why would you even choose that department? Why that one? Were there other ones you were considering, or did you feel like that was the most interesting for a specific reason? Because I think that could help a lot of people say, anyone interviewing and they ask you why debt capital markets or why capital markets, what were your thoughts? Why did you choose that group?
Yeah, I think a lot of the sort of information that undergraduates can get are quite heavily focused on equities and the M&A, the ECM market. But I've always been more of a debt person. I think back then I chose DCM because I thought that it was that bonds were a bigger market, and I've also tried to read as much as possible that it was a fast-paced, I guess, job compared to M&A or ECM, where you can spend 9 months on a project. I don't have that kind of stamina, really. So DCM was the right choice, and it turned out well.
I wouldn't say that in an interview for anyone listening that you don't have the stamina for DCM. But no, I get what you're saying. You're saying that you didn't want to be on a long-term engagements. You wanted shorter-term engagements.
Yeah, that's right, and closer to the market as well.
Closer to the market. Cool. So how did things progress? So you did your rotations. Were you learning a lot, or the first few months, since you were kind of finance, you had a little bit of finance background, economics, was it pretty easy for you, or was it really hard? Talk to me about the hours, the pay, anything you can share for the listeners.
For the rotations, it wasn't that fulfilling, really. In terms of the technical knowledge that you can get, I think I'll just be honest here, because some of these rotations were for 3 months, where the receiving department that would take you in for that 3 months didn't see you as somebody who could contribute to their work. So then they would probably entertain you, teach you for the first month, and then they would their attention towards you would drop off.
Yeah,
that would be. I don't know about other companies that have management associate programs for years. I think then they may have a culture of having management associates on rotations all over. But for some of the banks, maybe not. So I think maybe at this point, my advice would be, if you had a say in the rotations, I think it would be good to have them really short or really long. So the receiving department can either just it's easier for them to decide if you're here really for a really short time. Then your focus will be to build your network with them.
Yeah, like 1 month or 6 months, not 3. Because at 3 months,
That's right.
you're like, they can kind of use you, but you can't do any long-term projects. And then, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That makes sense. That's interesting. So they had you kind of in this in between, so you didn't get as much value. You probably got to see a lot of different parts of the bank, which was useful, but it could have been shorter, you're saying, in each stint. And you could.
Yeah, that's right. I think back then I realized that, and my focus wasn't on building the technical knowledge. Back then it was just I decided to focus on having a high level view of the things that this department would do, and also most importantly, get to know the people that are there. So
I forgot to ask you, this bank in Singapore, sorry to go back on you, but did you ever do a summer internship there or anywhere else? Like,
no,
you just
so going back to the whole job applications in university, I was very late to all of that. I think I missed the whole what's that, the
resume drops.
Yeah, the one before the internships, the first year one.
The spring
one. Yeah, I missed that. I missed the summer internships. So in a way, I kind of fell short, I guess, of some of the job requirements. I think even back then, a first class honors wasn't enough. You gotta have like a few internships in the same.
Yeah, it's competitive, especially back then if the economy was weaker and they weren't hiring as many.
Yeah, that's right.
So, okay, but you still landed a job. That was kind of what, during your last year in university, you kind of just started applying when you got back onto campus?
Yeah, in my final year, I decided to focus more on job applications and securing that job even before graduation. I think that was pretty much the strategy.
Yeah.
I definitely studied way more than I should have. So I was good on securing a good honors grades for my.
Yep, that's cool. And then how about pay for this bank? I have no idea about pay in Singapore. I'd love some insight. Is it similar to other front office roles in other countries in terms of like, the overall pay in terms of like base and bonus?
Yeah, no, it wasn't going to be the same as I guess what the numbers were in.
Well, I know like New York pays higher than UK typically.
Oh yeah, then Asia definitely pays less.
It pays less. So do you mind sharing like a range? You don't have to give us the exact numbers, but do you remember around what it was?
Let me just quickly. Oh, it was like $3,000 per month. My starting.
Okay. Got it. For starting base. Okay. And then any bonus, or it was mostly a rotation program, so there's like minimal bonus or no bonus?
Yeah, the rotation, it was like minimal.
Yeah. Okay. And so you kind of go through this rotation. It's like a full 2 year, 2 years. Is that right? Or
mine was 1.5.
1.5 years, and then kind of you get to your group, and you're there for a little while. And then what's your thought process? Like, I'm going to be here long term. You start looking right away for a different job. What's your thought process in terms of like you said, exits?
You mean during the rotation or after?
Both. Either like, did you start thinking right away, like I need to, look at a different firm, or did you think of, hey, this would be a really good exit? Did you start applying to, jobs in other countries, or do you think, hey, I'm going to stay here?
I did all of that.
So you were looking at everything. But you knew you wanted to move.
Yeah, I think when I was in the rotations, I was not. I wasn't super happy, but that was just me back then, thinking that I'm in these rotations. I'm not getting the technical knowledge that I should be, and also that was one. And I started to look elsewhere. Back then, I was thinking that, okay, I just started working for in my first year, so I could maybe try and apply again back to some of these fresh graduate programs. That was number one. Number two, I was thinking because I graduated in the during the Eurozone crisis, I was hoping to land something again when the economy was better.
Yep. And so how did that go? How were the applications? Were you able to kind of get into any of the processes?
I didn't get anything at all.
They just probably wouldn't even look at you because you weren't in school still.
No, yeah, this was in my first or second year of working in Singapore. Yeah.
But you said you tried to apply back into the graduate program for school. Did you get any interviews from that?
No.
So where did you get some success? And did you network at all, talking to people? What's that like in terms of over there? How did you kind of end up at your next role?
Yeah, I think the job applications didn't really have any success. I guess I just started working, and I think in my second or third year, I got a call from a recruiter that represented a bank also in Singapore that wanted to start up their DCM desk. So I went over. It was for a Chinese bank that wanted to do more DCM deals. So I think back then, the DCM deals that I did were very focused in Singapore, Southeast Asia. So I wanted to do something more closely related to China.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so this was an opportunity for that. So did you interview for it? What were the interviews like for that kind of role? You just talked about the deals you had already done, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. I think the bank, it was more like an experience hire interview. So there wasn't a lot of all the basic stuff with all the assessments and stuff. So they just basically looked at my CV, the deals I've done, and they were like, okay, yeah, I think you're good to go.
Awesome. So you made that move. And then how was that? You're still in Singapore, but how was that working for a Chinese bank?
Yeah, I think it was moving from a mature DCM platform where everybody knew what they were doing. It was like the deal came in and came out smoothly. So it was that was the first role. The second one was, as I said before, they were trying to set up the DCM desk. So it was a bit of trying to get the deals and also building up the business almost from scratch.
Wow. So a little more entrepreneurial.
Yeah, I quite liked it though. I think I quite liked that whole entrepreneurial startup kind of.
Was it a big pay bump at least because you kind of took more of a leadership role there as an experienced hire, or not really?
Not really. I think I definitely did take a pay rise, but it was more of the case where they didn't have a budget to hire somebody more senior, so they kind of settled for somebody who had 2 to 3 years of experience.
Got it.
Just rolled with it.
They roll with it, and fingers crossed that it wouldn't backfire. So how did it go? What was that like? And then, why make the move you did? Eventually you went to, I mean, we can talk about it just in terms of, whether to work in Hong Kong or Singapore or, or just Asia in general for career development. I'd love to just hear your opinion, and, for the listeners out there that are kind of in a similar boat, if you could just give them advice, since you have a lot of experience kind of in both markets. So
yeah, I've always, okay, so before going into all the specific experiences, I just wanted to state my guiding principle when it comes to my career and my experiences. I've always wanted to diversify my experience and always dive into something almost completely new. So I would say I'm quite happy to say that in my relatively short career, I have worked in Chinese banks, worked for Chinese companies, worked in Hong Kong, Singapore, even a short stint in Jakarta. That was one of my rotations. So, and I've done front office sort of sell side DCM banking. I've done some of the rotations. I've even crossed over to the client, issuer client side. So in a way, I definitely would. That's sort of the guiding principle that I had for my career. Just diversifying, I guess, branching out. Getting a bigger picture of the entire situation rather than sort of drilling down into one sector and then being like 20 years in that sector and becoming like MD. That's not really my sort of way I wanted to do it.
And what are your thoughts on language? You said, we could talk about whether learning Chinese is worth it or not.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that I wanted to talk about. I'm not gonna discourage anybody from learning the language for sure. It's definitely quite difficult, and I've seen people, non-Chinese people who wanted to learn the language, and they have done it quite well, and they are definitely really hardworking. They can speak it well, but the main thing that I wanted to say is when it comes to the finance world, I don't think the hiring companies will take any sort of language any candidates, no matter what your proficiency is. So even for me, I'm of Chinese ethnicity, from Singapore. My Chinese is pretty okay. Working in a Chinese bank and then another Chinese organization after. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like they would consider my Chinese as up to their standard. Mm-hmm. And I've also heard, what's it called? Anecdotes of hiring managers who only hire native Chinese people. And it even got to the point where they would hire somebody, they would prefer somebody from their own, home province. So.
Oh, you see that in the United States too. I mean, hey, I'm going to hire somebody only from the South, or I'm going to hire somebody only from the West Coast, right? Yeah. You can do that too. Anecdotal too. Yeah.
That's right. And it's kind of the whole thing where there's just so many candidates out there. They don't have to pick you, really.
There's no reason to pick you if you're not a native speaker. Like there's just
yeah. I think it sounds it would sound impressive that you can speak it, but in terms of really getting down, converting it or monetizing that language skills for your career in Asia, not really. Yeah, I'm definitely like firsthand.
Very hard to do. Yeah, no, I've spoken with some guests on the pod that have been able to do that, and they've expressed that it was incredibly difficult, and that they felt doors were always closed to them, even if they were completely fluent, almost native fluency.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. So yeah, tell us, I guess, in terms of exits and treasury, I'd love to learn more about that. What does that even mean? So, and I understand DCM, you're working on bond issuances, all this stuff, sell side, right? And then you move to the Chinese bank in Singapore, doing similar type of work, just a little bit more entrepreneurial. But then what was your next move? And let's wrap it up and just tell me about like why you moved there, and then specifically, why you made the latest jump and what that entails.
Sure. Yeah, I think the next role after these two DCM roles was with a sort of a non-bank, just a corporate basically.
Mm-hmm.
And how I landed that role was because they were my client in DCM. So I had worked with them closely for their bond issuances. They knew my working style, and they were very comfortable with me. So they were like, they just extended this sort of. They basically asked, do you want to come over to Hong Kong to join us and help us issue bonds and fundraise for the company. So I decided it was a good move. Moving from it was a whole like a holistic consideration. So I decided that generally it was a move from Singapore to Hong Kong. That was definitely something I looked. It was a plus point to me, because I've never worked in Hong Kong, and it was a move from banking, sell-side banking, to now I guess the corporate treasury side. So I'll explain a bit more on that, why I made that move. I think in front office sell-side DCM, you're always trying to get your deals. So there's a bit of a sales element to it where you're trying to jam in your clients' deals. Then Treasury on that front is not much of a sales. You're more of the client now, and it's more strategic for sure. In a way, how do you decide between different funding options? Do you issue debt? Do you take loans? Do you raise more equity? So it's definitely a choice between doing a front office sales job versus a strategic role. That was definitely the consideration back then, and I quite like this treasury job.
And so tell me more about like working inside of corporation, the treasury department. Obviously, these are big corporations. In order to have have a treasury department that's like meaningful, and so tell me a little bit about like how your day-to-day switched from sell side DCM banking. Like, you'd be spending most of your days doing what, like looking at new deals for your clients when you're in DCM versus, how did it change? Modeling, emphasis, what? So like people could get a perspective of what treasury is like.
Yeah, I think in Asia DCM there wasn't a lot of modeling for sure. Hours between DCM and treasury, the hours were definitely a lot more intense in DCM than in treasury. I think treasury you can pretty much assume you get off on time.
Like 60, 70-hour weeks in DCM down to 50 or 80-hour weeks average?
I don't know what you call it, but like 9 to 6, 9 to 7.
9 to 6 for DCM.
No. I mean for treasury.
For treasury, yeah. So 9 to 6. Okay, so so a normal like 40 to 50-hour week.
Yeah, that's right.
But then in banking it was like an extra 10 to 20 hours on the top of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's pretty tough.
And then during crunch time, it can be like 9 to midnight, 9 to 2.
Yeah. Sounds familiar.
Yeah. I think the thing about DCM is that it's kind of like a constant sprint rather than a marathon. There will be some times where there will be some like minor downtimes, but when the deals come, you just gotta rush, man. I quite like that actually. Yeah, and I think in a way it was a good first career for me to jump into something that intense, and then moving to something that is less intense after that.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's hard to go the other way.
Definitely, yeah, definitely, yeah. You get your grounding first. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, what's your thought process? Any kind of final words of wisdom before we call it, in terms of like the path you went on? You thinking of staying in Treasury long term, and any thoughts for the listeners who want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think it was definitely Treasury is something that I would like to pursue long term. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if I would have landed in this if I didn't go through the DCM route that I did.
Yeah.
And certainly things would have been a lot different if I had actually landed something in London anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I think in general, if you're thinking of finance as a first career, first job, I think it's pretty good in terms of the grind that you get. I don't think subsequent everything else would probably seem easier.
I'd agree with that. It was my experience from banking to even to private equity, which was it was not the easiest transition. But well, listen, CapM, really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your wisdom and your experience with the listeners. Yeah, let's stay in touch. And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.